Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me is Sam West, and we're going to talk about the spell Reverse Gravity. This is kind of a big one. I think this one scales with your imagination and with what your DM will allow you to get away with.
Yeah.
Because it's really, I mean, the spell description tells you some stuff, but I think it's really hard to lock down what actually reversing gravity in an area would do.
There's some weird shit that
Yeah.
starts to happen when you start using reverse gravity. Like, easiest thing that jumps to mind is liquids. Liquids with reverse gravity gets wonky. Running streams and stuff, because they're going to go in and out, so you have these weird flows, and being able to move and navigate in them becomes a little bit bizarre. And then the things in them also are going to be flung all over the place. You can do some pretty bizarre things with that. But at the end of the day, right, like, you also have to say, reverse gravity says, DM, you best know the environment because it's getting flipped upside down and it is going crazy. Like, small things like rocks become meaningfully damaging projectiles as they fall from the floor to the ceiling to hit people. It's neat. It also has like a point where it stops, because once you hit the ceiling of it, gravity is just normal up there, which means you start going like back and forth if there's no ceiling, like no physical ceiling or wall.
Right.
Which means, again, things like liquids get like, whoa, so it's just pulling up there, but then spreading out and then falling back in, but it's going back into reverse gravity. You get these weird funnels of water and liquids just flowing all over the place. Oh God, this spell's weird. I love it so much.
I mean, this is so crazy. I just don't even know what questions to ask.
Sure.
All right, what do you do with this? As a player?
Okay. There are a lot of things you can do with reverse gravity. They're not necessarily going to be happening frequently unless you're looking at it combatively. So using this combatively, you get to pick an area that is relatively far away from you and throw everything in that area directly upward. No save, which is powerful. You can say that 50-foot radius circle that's full of monsters flies to the ceiling. Incredibly powerful. If they can't fly or otherwise navigate that environment, they just fall 100 feet upward. If it's like an 80-foot till the next ceiling, you're just doing 8d6 damage to them, no save. They just fly upward, smash into a wall, and take whatever fall damage from falling upward it is. And then have to navigate getting to you in that kind of environment. Now, we're in huge spaces here. This is like giant underground chasm kind of space. If there's just sky above you, at the very minimum, they're going to be flying up into the air and have to figure out how to get down, which is good. Now, this is a 7th level spell, so we're dealing with things that are a bit shoddier territory as far as things that will be meaningfully affected by this. Things with fly speeds, things that are larger and more likely to be able to like stick themselves to the ground. But even if like you grab onto a fixed object like the spell suggests, how do you get out of this, right? Like, you can't bring the fixed object with you, so you're just stuck there. Meaning, and as a combat tool, you can just pick a giant area and lock it down. That at its own, useful.
What about the ground itself? I mean, like dirt, does that just start?
Loose dirt goes upwards.
Yeah. But I mean, again, this comes down to interpretation. What's defined as loose dirt? I mean, how loose does the dirt have to be?
I like the idea of
graves with this.
I think so. I would say, like, if you're in an area that is regularly dug up, if you're into an area that is like mucky, uneven ground or prone to earthquakes and stuff like that, this can just uproot a bunch of garbage and make a big hole and throw all that stuff upward and make a weird floating continent thing in the sky, which is super cool. Now, granted, that is a lot to just come up with on the fly as the DM whenever you're fighting the cemetery encounter and someone's just like, reverse gravity. It's not necessarily going to be every single time. And I think that's honestly the biggest downfall of this spell is you have to figure out, in the spaces that you didn't necessarily plan for there to be reversed gravity, what reverse gravity does to an enormous amount of the space. That's definitely gonna be one of the hardest bits. Like, that's a really old building. How much of that is fixed so that if it were flipped on its head, would not go skyward? And then you're in these odd moments of like, well, as the rubble breaks, it's breaking upward, which may lead to more things getting pulled. And do you just have like this slow, gradual building leading up from the floor and snapping and flying skyward? That's super sweet. How do you run that mechanically, though, right? Do you say that's where as a DM, you're just definitely flying rule is cool, being like, yeah, you're pretty sure this is going to fly upward in like 2 rounds as you're gripping below the table out of the floor of the building that's going to be skyward in a minute. This is not something you want every session either.
No.
This is definitely like, this will be a couple really cool set pieces. I would not try and do it too much more than that unless you really love this kind of thing. If you're doing this as a player, be gentle. It is a really cool effect, but God, is it hard to manage. And there are a lot of ways to weaponize this. Again, the fall damage at minimum is where like our floor is. And there's some like, if someone is standing on top of a heavy object and the gravity is reversed, they will be squished by said heavy object should they not get out of the way in time. That's interesting. I don't know how much damage it's going to deal, but it's interesting. If there's things already up near the ceiling, like loose floating or flying creatures and gravity shifts, and they get all kerfluffled because they weren't ready for gravity to shift on them, they hit the floor, and then the floor starts hitting them. Who knows what goes on there, right? It's difficult to tell, and it's definitely not the easiest thing in the world. You can conceivably set up a trap where as the kobolds run into you, the barbarian just starts yeeting boulders into the reverse gravity, and as they get up top there, it just starts raining rocks from the sky on them that you're just rolling loosely down the hill. It is near endlessly applicable, but also really hard to use in those situations sometimes. It's really hard to figure out, like, oh, right, reverse gravity, this is this really cool thing here. Because it feels like you have to plan around it a lot. It feels like you kind of want to have the environment go just right. And this also can go horribly backwards for you. So, I don't know. It is definitely one of the coolest spells in the game. And it's definitely one of those spells that once you cast it 3 times, you'll be like, oh my God, we're doing this again. So yeah, that's, I think, the easiest place to land on it. Practical usage is very hard to talk about because holy cow, does this spell do a lot of things.
Yeah. Like I said, we got notes here on world exploration. What's that about?
Oh, yeah. So this also can just be fly in a lot of cases. This can be just a gigantic cylinder that launches you upward. It launches you upward in an uncomfortable way, but this can be a way that you can navigate some spaces in really wonky ways. Yeah. If you are in a big plane traveling, extra dimensional kind of flying castles stuff, adventuring, this is a tool that can navigate that environment in a way that really no other tool can. Fly kind of does it, but fly also doesn't affect everything else in the environment. So there'll be times where a falling castle, reversing gravity and sending it upward, has a weird effect on things, especially when it's only part of the castle. And then you have to be with your DM, and you're both in the tank thinking, okay, the center of this castle is falling into a reverse gravity as it's leaving the sky. What the hell happens? And you're like, I guess it slows, but does it bounce up a little bit? Does it start breaking apart? How does this small area that's not affected by gravity, or that's affected by regular, the area around it affected by regular gravity, interact with the inverted gravity in the center of it all? Bananas kind of exploration stuff where you're like, did we take enough physics to figure this out? And are we willing to do physics playing Dungeons and Dragons? And some of us nerds are, absolutely. But other people are going to be like, we're just going to do this Marvel style, physics be damned, and whatever looks coolest is what's going to happen, which I personally would recommend because that's very fun. So yeah, as a world exploration tool, this will give you the keys to some really bizarre cars. You'll be able to go and do things that you're like, yeah, I guess we're going to be riding this building up there. I guess that's how we get to the dragon spontaneously. That's how we get to the top of this layer. It's 100 feet tall. So this navigates a huge amount of space, and it's 50 feet wide. So a lot of stuff is going there.
Now there are some spells, quite a few, where I've read your reviews and you say these shouldn't be spells. These are better as Dungeon Master tools. Now, this spell is kind of an exception because there are plenty of valid reasons as a player why you'd want to use this, and it would be awesome. However, just on the fly, it's kind of a nightmare for a dungeon master. However, as a DM tool, when you've got the time to prepare an encounter based around this, then that, I'd say it's a lot better that way.
Oh, for sure. As something that you have as a DM, this is a puzzle of itself. And thinking about how to navigate it makes it super interesting. At minimum, the fact that it includes just a way to stay on the ground makes it so that there is a trap-like element to it. And maintaining reverse gravity areas when you've prepared them can be some of the coolest encounters your players will remember forever. At the same time, it is one of the most fun player spells I think they've ever made. It's just so miserable to DM if you're not great at thinking on the fly that well. If you're like, for newer DMs, figuring out how to work reverse gravity, even for experienced DMs that just don't play this kind of games a lot, it is rough. I kind of, as much as I love it as a player spell, I think it probably would be best for the health of everyone if it were, again, a DM toolbox thing that wasn't in the player's hands. I really love it as a player. I want to cast this, but I think
unless you've got a really
better for the game
seasoned
for it not
DM.
to be. Yeah.
Yeah, because there are some DMs that could handle this.
A lot of them won't, though.
No, more than would be able to. But it's just too cool for me to say it should be in the DM's hands only.
Sure. Oh, agreed. I don't think I could ever say this can't be a player spell. I think it's probably like responsible to not let this be a player spell, but it's way too cool for me to want that to happen.
All right, you got any final thoughts?
A 5 out of 5. This is genuinely a spell that warps the game around it, but in one of the coolest ways that you can do it.
Yeah. I'm in 100% agreement with you.
It's
all right,
sweet.
everyone. That was Reverse Gravity. Thank you, Sam, and thank you for watching us. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description, where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, Sam's full review of the spell, and other fun things.